You're listening to This Motorcycle Life, conversations about why we ride. Episode 49, Those Who Wait. I'm Bruce Philp, and thank you for listening. Well, what drives motorcycling's late bloomers? Why do some people take this up at a point in their lives when they've got so much to lose? Well, you're about to meet someone whose story suggests that maybe that's the point, and whose attitude is about as far as it gets from the stereotype of middle-aged bikerdom. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'll share it with you in just a moment. But first, let's take care of a little business. With November now behind us, I want to say thanks to the listeners who stepped up to support the Movember Foundation in the name of this podcast. Well, their numbers were small, but they were mighty. Thank you, Tim Skloss, George Galbraith, my buddy Chris Smith, Bill Iserman, and a special thanks to Mike Burgrave for stepping up. If it was on your to-do list to help, donations still count for the current year until the end of December. Look for a link in my show notes. And I also want to offer a special welcome to the people listening to this show on Spotify. Well, this podcast has always depended a lot on the Apple platform for some reason, but something happened in 2022 to change that. TML is now among the top 5% most shared podcasts on Spotify, percentage-wise at least. Well, I don't know how you found us, but I'm really glad you did. Welcome aboard. And with that, why don't we get started? The theme for this episode came to me in a Tim Hortons, or more accurately, as I was leaving a Tim Hortons halfway through my last ride of the season. I caught my reflection in the window, and what looked back at me was strikingly different from the way I was feeling in that moment. How I felt was more like Tom Cruise crossed with Ewan McGregor. How I looked was like an unremarkable guy with a mop of gray hair who should probably have skipped the donut. And for one brief spell-breaking moment, I wondered if what the other folks in line saw clomping towards the exit was, I can hardly bear to say it, a motorcycling cliché. And if not for me, then for all the listeners I've heard from over the years who took up riding in the middle of their lives, I thought it was time to talk about that. Popular culture trains us to make certain assumptions about motorcycling's late bloomers, that we're having a midlife crisis, that we're filling an existential void, that we're trying to turn back time somehow. And although these may not be the kinds of things we'd admit to ourselves, I also know, and you probably do too, that they are very, very far from the whole story of what it means to choose this life when you've already lived so much. And that's why Catherine Meade was the perfect partner for this conversation. Catherine Meade became a motorcyclist at the age of 46, but not for any of the reasons I listed a moment ago. She was already an accomplished professional and deeply committed to community service. The week we connected, she was being honored as one of the most powerful women in Canada by the Women's Executive Network. She's also a lifelong athlete, an inveterate traveler, and those are just some highlights from what seems to me a very full life. Catherine Meade wasn't bored. She wasn't regretful about unfulfilled potential. She wasn't chasing lost youth or a sense of purpose. But she's still got a motorbike, and then did some pretty rad things with it. Well, to find out why, I reached Catherine Meade at her home just down the road in Toronto. Catherine, thank you for speaking with me today. I know it took some doing to fit this into your schedule, so I'm really grateful for that. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and I'm just glad you want to chat. So yeah, I'm glad we were able to find the time. I'm always happy to talk motorcycles, so it's it's all good.
You said that the first time we made contact, you said that to me, and I thought, okay, we're going to get along just fine. She's a biker, and
Yeah. Although it's funny, I always say, there are bikers and there are people who love motorcycling, and I'm likely in that second group of people who love motorcycling. There might be questionable at times whether I'd fit into biker culture, but I certainly fit into culture or a world where folks love motorcycling. So
it's funny how people resist that label, and maybe fairly
I
so.
think that people would, true bikers might not put that label on me, consider me a poser.
Well, we'll see about that.
So it's not so much that yeah, maybe it's just a good offense. Remove myself before I get removed. So something like that. Yeah.
Well, so why don't we dive into it?
Yeah.
In my introduction, which people will have just heard by the time they get to this point, I will have introduced you, and I will have explained a bit about who you are, and that you're an accomplished professional and someone who's passionate about doing good things in the world. And this is not going to paint a picture of somebody who's missing something in their lives. You're not going to sound like somebody who's in search of a purpose or meaning or stimulation. And yet, at the age of 46, if I have that right, you took up riding motorcycles. So I hate to task you right off the bat with a long answer, but I really want to hear that story, all the way from the first inkling to the day you got your M endorsement, and a bike. What happened? How did this erupt in your life?
Well, that is a good question, and sadly, it probably is a bit long, but no, or maybe it's short because I've always been fascinated by motorcycles and with motorcycles. But I grew up. My dad was a Baptist minister, so we moved around a bit. And when we were in a very small community in Nova Scotia. A teenager, I was maybe 10 or something, and one of the local teenagers, she was 15, riding with her boyfriend in fog, and he lost control, and in the end, she was killed.
Oh dear.
And like this was like a cautionary tale for all of my life. That motorcycles are bad. We saw what happened to Jill Link. And so that was really it, and it was really my parents' fear, primarily my mom's, that sort of kept me from exploring that all that much. And then ultimately, since at some point we're living our own lives and not our parents' lives,
Right.
I decided I would actually go for it. And I must admit, there were a couple of times that I was gonna, and then getting to the weekend, there seemed to be some reason or the next why it didn't happen. And then finally, when I was able to do it, there were a few things, but not the least of which was by then I'm in my mid 40s. And, if you're going to talk about, classic, middle age crisis, there you are, riding, getting a motorcycle license and, adding to that, I'm lesbian. So it really sounded like one big stereotype.
Oh dear.
And I thought, well, you know what? I don't care. That's not going to stop me from doing it just because it happens to fit into a stereotype. So I went for it, and my sort of gateway vehicle, if I'll call it that, was I first bought a Vespa, a 250cc Vespa, and that was sort of kind of just to ease into it, more like ease my mom into. I had, it's not a motorcycle, Mom. It's a scooter. I tried to really downplay it.
Right.
As you may or may not know, although it looks like you have a 300cc Vespa, it has pep.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I tried to make it sound like, it's kind of like a moped, really. Anyway, but so that was it. And in fact, quite interestingly, it was red, and my first motorcycle 2 years later was burgundy. It was a burgundy Harley Sportster, and for the longest time, my mom didn't really realize that I had that was a new, it was just something on two wheels that made her very unhappy. And so I was able to, get away for a while with her thinking that, I was still riding this moped. Anyway, so, but nonetheless, I did it, was thrilled. I must say, I got my license at a time, so it was 2011. It's not like that long ago. But I got it at a time when in Nova Scotia there were a few things that aren't the case now. But number one, you did the course, and then you just waited 30 days. You'd go into, it's like Service Ontario, but Access Nova Scotia, get a new thing, and you had a full motorcycle license. So it was just the passage of 30 days. And as well, back then, or I don't know if this has changed, but you could do the license on a scooter. And as long as it was 150 cc's, you got a motorcycle license. So I did the scooter course. And I got my motorcycle license, my full motorcycle license from doing a scooter course.
Oh, wow.
So 2 years later, fast forward 2 late years, when I actually want to ride a motorcycle, and I didn't know how because I hadn't taken the course. And then by then, if the only way you can sort of learn how to ride a motorcycle is if you take these fairly expensive full weekend courses, and then any of the sort of refresher courses are like bring your own motorcycle. But there aren't sort of these courses where you can refresh your skills and they provide a motorcycle. So I had that awkward in between stage where I owned a bike but didn't know how to ride it, but had to get to the place where the course was being offered. So I just want you to know that wasn't pretty if you're trying to think about how that went, as I was stalling my way all through town and figuring out. I learned I went to really YouTube and tried to figure out, that's what the clutch is and all that, and sort of God's honest truth. So it wasn't pretty, but I did get to Humber College to take the course it was a refresher for other people. I wasn't really offering up that it was actually me learning. Anyway, but so those are some of the sad parts. And of course, actually picking up my bike, the motorcycle, I got it. It wasn't in town. I bought my motorcycle out of town in Woodstock, Ontario. And of course, I had to get the bike from where I bought it to Toronto, where I live, to take the course the next day, right? So anyhow, all that to say, there were some moments that they weren't pretty, I might as well be honest. And I took secondary roads, which was not only good from a safety perspective, but there were fewer witnesses as to what kind of situation was going on with me, using my my newly found YouTube motorcycling skills to get home. But anyway, thankfully, that's all behind me. I've now been riding for years and all over our continent and elsewhere. So it's all good, but it wasn't a pretty start. Let me just say that.
Yeah. Well, look, I was going to ask you about that in a minute, but I'll ask you now, because you're talking to somebody who had his first motorcycle delivered. So, so much respect to you because I know Woodstock and I know Toronto, and I'm sure that most of that trip was fairly calm, but Toronto is still Toronto. So my question was going to be, is this because you're brave? Is this a typical Catherine move, or what does it reveal about you that this is how you decided to solve the problem of getting a bike with a clutch?
Yeah, I'm not sure anyone can interpret really what that says about me. But one thing certainly is that, I'll get it done, right? If that's to get done, I'll get it done.
Right.
And it just so happened that, that's where I bought the bike. And it was off of wasn't from a dealer, it was from a person. So delivery wasn't, it was a private sale, I should say, because dealers are people too. So what I mean rather is that I got it from a private party, and delivery wasn't in the offing. And so that was really, that was really it. And yes, you're right about the phases of my return home. So one was that riding from Woodstock to somewhere outside of Toronto, and that was one set of circumstances. And I must say, so I had been riding the 250cc Vespa before. That's the only thing I'd ridden that was motorized, and the Sportster was, it's an 883, right? So nearly 900 cc's. And so it's, if you imagine something like, well, I don't know if you've seen the Calgary Stampede or some sort of like bucking bronco situation,
Yes.
But that's really what I had going on there, because it kind of would take off, and so I had that moment, which was moments. Sorry, I would love it to be singular, but really, it's plural. So I had these moments, and but at least you're going straight and blah blah blah. When I got to Toronto, the issue was stalling all over town, man, because I didn't really know the clutch and so you can get away with things like on a highway, so to speak.
Yeah.
But when you actually have to stop for red lights, I don't even want to tell you about what it took like on a hill, because I hadn't gotten to that part on YouTube yet. And anyhow, that's a whole other scene. But anyway, so yes, that scene, that was all quite interesting. But I guess really it does. I am someone who, if I put my mind to something, I'm going for it, right? And there might be issues, and I just have to solve it, but I'm going for it. And so that's really, yeah, I guess that is what it says about me, among other things like, what's wrong with you? But it might say some other things too, but that's it.
Well, I think it says, honestly, biker things to refer to the earlier part of our conversation. I want to get just back to this motive thing for a minute. So it sounds like there wasn't just a day when you woke up and said, it has to be now, I have to get a motorcycle. So that's cool. But when I read your profile on the Women Riders Now website, a phrase caught my eye, and it had to do with something like reaching a point in life where you have to put your own needs first. And as we talked about when we exchanged emails prior to this interview, that resonated for me a little bit. And I couldn't help noting that in light of your vocation for community service, it struck me that was a possible explanation for all this. And so I wonder, was that a theme here, or did getting a bike have anything to do with, self-care, or was it more towards the indulgence end of the scale? How would you, looking back on it, characterize your motive?
To the extent that I would describe as self-care. So I don't have kids, or, so there are some other people, there are a lot of people and a lot of women who have, like other human beings, who are relying on them for everything from food to, you name it. So I don't have such folks in my life. So it wasn't that about putting my needs first. But, if I was going to characterize anything, it really would be about, it actually is no small matter to, mention that I knew my mom would be stressed by that situation, but seriously, I've given her all manner of things to stress about in my life, so that's really just one of them. And certainly she, as I went on and was very clear, this is what I'm doing. Every large trip I went on, or really just any time I rode, if I was coming to visit, now you're not bringing you're not bringing that thing, are you? So there was, I can't say she ever warmed up to the idea. I made sort of light of it earlier, like, at some point we're living our own lives, but that really is it. That, and it's really about, you might have some concerns, but that's really, so be it, because really I am indeed living my own life, always have. And so, I would say that for me, it was also more about, I certainly wouldn't have characterized it as, putting my needs first. but it was more about exploring something, taking the time, because you have to do courses and whatever, and invest a weekend and whatever it might be there. But just taking the time and making the time to do something I've always wanted to do. And so that was really it, about finally doing it. And so, yeah, and that is what I did in 2011.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. And I think, I'm going to make references to your, CV at various moments during this conversation because it's so impressive. And I think that's lots of responsibility. So it wouldn't have shocked me if you'd said that this was a way to sort of create a boundary there. But so you started to write a blog about your experience, and I think in that piece there was an article about the obstacles you felt that you would face becoming a writer, or the obstacles that anyone in your position might face. And the one that caught my eye was fear, which is a subject we've talked about on this podcast a few times. It's a big part of writing. Sure. And I think when you're not a kid anymore, the fears that sort of stay with you begin to take root in experience, and they get harder to shake. And at least that was my experience anyway. And I wonder if you, looking back, think that's true, and how you dealt with that fear.
For sure, fear is part of it. And you're right, because when you're younger, it's like, it can't happen to me. I don't know, people are accidents, but it can happen to me. And then we get older, it's like, oh my God, it is going to happen to me. Like right. Something shifts where you're like, it goes from, it can't happen to me till in every likelihood, it will happen to me. Right. Mm-hmm. So, and for me, thankfully, I can say, that's where I was. But, there's fear all the time. I was just overseas and riding in some pretty treacherous conditions. And, I can't, for some reason, I can't shake being a lifelong learner. So it doesn't matter whether it's pure academics. And I'm working on another graduate diploma, so I can't seem to stop going to school there, but also in terms of skills. And so, I've taken, every time I get a new bike, I take a course from RTI, the Rider Training Institute, and I've done an assortment of courses on off-road riding, and in fact the women's rider now. I guess it was an art, whatever the entry was that led you to the trip I took to Colorado, but that was a training tour. Mm-hmm. So I've had some training, and so fast forward to Nepal just 6 weeks ago, right? Most of the time I'm fine, and I now have a number of years behind me. And I have taken, an assortment of courses. But yeah, you're riding our first night. It's a much longer story, but night fell, and we were nowhere near. Our whole tour group was nowhere near where we needed to be because there had been a landslide and some other things. And so we're riding at night in rain, in another country, on the other side of the road. I mean, like, what else do I want? What else can you add to it? And the roads were all messed up and washed out and all this, and this is what we're riding in. I would love the story to be, and I was thinking, hey, I'm a great rider. Are you kidding? I was writing thinking like, okay, just focus on that. You know what to do. I was doing like, trust yourself, trust the bike, trust yourself, like all these things, mantras that we learned in courses. So yeah, there's, but I think there's some healthy fear. It's when it becomes paralyzing that's problematic. Yeah, but I think there's some healthy fear that keeps you, keeps the adrenaline going and keeps you focused, because the bikes are very unforgiving. So yeah, millisecond of not paying attention and things can go, off. Mm. But Yeah, and my challenge when I was in 5 years ago, did a motorcycle trip through southern Africa, and the roads there were really quite challenging too. And so again, you're riding standing up and all stuff. But I didn't have the training behind me that I did in Colorado. I didn't have that in 2017, and I spent my so, there's all these different versions of the story, right?
Mhm.
How was the trip in Africa? Oh, it was beautiful. Oh, there were animals. Like really, there's a whole bunch of very honest versions of the story, right? So,
Yeah, yeah.
one is the experience of your riding, and in all honesty, in Botswana, looking up and seeing in the distance elephants crossing the road. Like seriously, how awesome. Can it get more awesome? I don't think so. Then there's the part, of course, we're in Namibia, and the whole time, really, that would, and with the state of the roads, and you're riding standing up the whole time, and they're mainly dirt roads, and it's corrugated, but the opposite direction that you're going, like it's horizontal in front of you, and you're riding, if you say you're
Right.
riding vertical.
Yep.
And like seriously, and then these big sandy ruts, and I spent the whole time going like, okay, don't ditch the bike, don't ditch the bike, don't ditch the bike. But I didn't have any skills, so I didn't get. I mean, it was by the end of my 3 weeks I was like, oh, whatever, bring it on, I'm ready. I didn't get any better because I was just doing the same thing the whole time, which was, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. And okay, don't ditch the bike, don't ditch the bike, don't ditch the bike. That was kind of what I did for 3 weeks. And so that whole experience, while beautiful, was very different than Nepal, or even what happened, our time in Colorado, because I had the training behind me to know how to handle that terrain. And even by the time I got to Nepal, I had the Colorado experience to go like, you can do this. This is, you've done it before. You can do this. In Africa, there was no, you can, it's more like you can't do this, because in fact I'd gone to California, to take Southern California in 2014, to take, because I knew one day I wanted to ride in Africa. And I know that while I was reading, not all the roads are paved, so I went to this off-road motorcycling course through a company called Rawhide, and that was awesome. And it was a 4-day training. The first 2 days you're at their kind of ranch in, I don't know what to call it actually, ranch course, amazing course in Santa Clarita. And then you did 2 days in the Mojave Desert. You drive in for a day, stay overnight, and you ride back, right? So fantastic. So the first day, great, I'm learning a lot of things. The second day, the very, very, very last exercise of the second day before we were going into dinner, this was it. And it might even have been optional, but me, oh, I'm going to try it. Anyway, so I tried it, and I, to this day, don't exactly know what happened. All I know is that not only did I ditch the bike fell, my foot got caught between a log and the motorcycle as it fell down. And I was not wearing adventure boots. I was wearing touring boots. So I just be clear that they asked to keep my boot as a cautionary tale for everyone else, because the way it was all ripped up. Anyway, and so everyone went into dinner. I went to the hospital. And the next day, everyone rode into the Mojave Desert, and I drove back to LAX, and I flew home. So, the only experience I'd had off-roading prior to getting to Africa was, in fact, me going like way off and ending up in the hospital. So, anyway, that was that's the only experience I had when I was in Africa. So I didn't even have so you can do it. Remember how it's like, no, don't remember how it went down in California. So, all that to say, training really makes the difference, and helps to shift from it's not even because I can't say what I had in Africa was a paralyzing fear because I went through it, but it really significantly affected the enjoyment factor of the whole experience when there was when there was ever present fear, whereas in Nepal it was more like just yeah, this is it's a little treacherous here, but you got to trust yourself, trust the bike. You're good. The bike is it's made to do this, and I knew that to be true, and we proved it every day. So different story.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you to talk about Africa a little more in a minute because it looked amazing and harrowing to me. So just to pick away a little bit more on the experience of kind of becoming a rider, I have the sense that this madness, it took a fairly strong hold on you. The blog was a bit of a tell, right? So when you're kind of, transformed by an experience like this, you want to share it. And that's kind of why this podcast exists, honestly. And so I could tell that this wasn't just another notch in your belt, so to speak, that this mattered to you. Oh, yeah. And so I wondered if you could talk a bit about how motorcycling worked its way into what was already a pretty full life. I mean, what was it like finding time to ride? Did you find community or not? Did you have to give things up to make room for this? I mean, was the whole thing easy or not easy? What reflections would you have on that?
Yeah. Those are good questions. So, highly coincidentally, very close friends of mine in Ottawa, we all got our license at the same time, but unbeknownst to each other, right? I didn't know they were even. I knew one of them rode years ago.
Oh wow!
I didn't know. So that one renewed her license, and the other. Got her license, right? And then as I said, I didn't even know. And at the same time as getting mine and riding. So a couple of things in terms of just riding around town, like this one thing. And I encourage people all the time because you hear people go, "Oh, I don't have time," and on weekends and this and that's like, do you drive to work? Yeah. Take your bike, right? Like back when we actually would leave our houses. So right now I would be weird to have a motorcycle in the house to come to work. But so back when we used to go to work, I took my motorcycle every day. And unless it was pouring rain on my way out the door. So that might be a different story, but that's how I rode all the time. And then as well, life in Toronto, half of the battle is trying to find a parking space, right. And the other is, paying for it. And you're in the restaurant. Oh, did I run out of time? As you may or may not know, at this moment, because I feel like any day it will change, but at this moment, parking a motorcycle in Toronto is free, right? So that's also an awesome excuse to take the bike. You're going to a movie, doing whatever, take the bike, and that really eliminates that whole "where am I going to park?" and "do I have to mortgage my home to park it?" That's all. So anyhow, I actually just bring it's part of my life, riding, just my day-to-day living. I should say running errands. I've got saddlebags. I can buying groceries, whatever it might be, unless it's eggs. But anyway, so that's how I do that. But in terms of the larger trips, my friends in 2015, and that was I got them in 2011, then I started riding the motor. I made the shift from the Vespa to the motorcycle in 2013. And in 2015, these friends they decided they were going to go to PEI. And so I joined them. So I, started from Toronto, met with them in Ottawa, did an overnight, and then we left together from Ottawa the next day. And then the next year in 2016, they mainly that same core, but there was a couple of extras. We decided to go down to Tennessee to do the Tail of the Dragon. And so we rode down together as well. And 2017, we again kind of not talking to each other, but had all decided that was the year we were going to do major trips. So one couple, they went to they rode all the way down to San Diego and then up the Pacific coast and then flew back from Vancouver and had their bikes flown back.
Oh, nice.
And that was the same year that I went to Africa. So anyhow, we've done all these, 2019, we went to the Gaspé together, and then been dealing with COVID. But this past summer we did Northern Ontario together. So yeah, that's worked out well, that in addition to my day-to-day commute, blah, 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 that's also been a really, really amazing opportunity to connect with friends while doing these longer rides, discovering our country or going down to the States. And, when we went down to the States, anywhere we go, we're usually a group of 4 or 5. And when we went down to Tennessee, there were 7 of us. And it seems to be, it doesn't really matter but people seem to know when women ride in number, it does catch people's attention. And certainly that trip when there were 7 of us riding, we certainly caught attention as we were riding together, that's for sure. But anyhow, so there's been lots of enjoyment on a sort of recreational level as well, just the day to day. So if I'm going to have a bike, I'm going to use it. That's my feeling.
Even if it
took this long to get it.
Even if it's an R9T, which is a beautiful.
I have to say I have a love affair with my bike.
Yeah.
So let's go. People have pictures of their kids. I have pictures of my bike I can show. But although and I talk about this in the blog. But I bought I bought a Triumph Bonneville after my Harley, and for me, people will have their own feelings, but for me, riding a cruiser, which is certainly great from you're able to flat foot. I'm not that tall, so it's great to have a bike that you can be flat footed on, but riding a cruiser in the city, it's your rider position and just where the wheel is, and people are trying to cut you off and clip you. I found it wasn't a great riding position so anyway, I ended up getting the Triumph Bonneville, and that, at least for me, I can't speak for anyone else, but for me, it made me feel more nimble just from the riding position there. And so I bought the Triumph Bonneville, and man, people, like the bike, they're always talking about, I had my brother had a Bonneville, whatever the story is. But then I made this I made an error. And just 3 weeks after I bought the bikes, I had purchased it, but after it got delivered, see, that bike got delivered, got it from a dealer. So three weeks after I had the bike delivered and I'd been riding around and, this is great. Then I erroneously went on a women's BMW testing day or riding day in Newmarket. So I rode out there, and it was wonderful. And I had read about the R9T. So I was on a list, you say which bikes you want to ride. And so they gave me the R9T, and I started it, and the sound, then we went on the ride, and I came back. It's like, oh man, I was in love with that bike. But I just bought it. I'd already bought a brand new bike. And so there was a song back in the day. It's sad to belong to someone else when the right one comes along. Anyhow, that's kind of, it's hard to belong to someone else when the right one comes along. That was it. But yeah, it was like, it's hard to have a brand new bike when you're, when you found the bike that's really for you. But I waited a respectable 2 years, and I think that's important.
Yeah.
And then I got rid. I bought them. It had to go, but and I have not looked back. So whereas I had gone through through a couple of, I was on my third bike in 3 years or 4 years. I don't see changing my R9T anytime soon.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, there's a lot to love. I adore that bike. If I would have one if it wasn't for the fact that I had to go out to the barn and pick which bike was going to get sold to make room for it, and I just couldn't do it. They get to be like horses after a while. So I was going to ask you how your friends reacted, but it sounds like they reacted by getting motorcycles. So that's awesome, because my friends acted like I joined a cult.
It was, as I said, I didn't even know, because they're in Ottawa and at that point I was in Halifax, and not even in Toronto, and we didn't. I happened to be visiting them, I think, in May, and it was like, hey, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm taking the course. And they're like, oh, we just got ours. Wow, what? So that was just coincidental, and then what's been great is having the opportunity to ride together. So it's really a core of 4 of us, and we've been riding. We've done each trip together, and then there's been some additional people here and there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been really awesome.
I wanted to ask you just a little bit longer on the blog for a second. There's definitely a hint of evangelism in it, and you don't make any bones about this not being completely a rose garden. I seem to recall a terrifying passage regarding going to Prince Edward Island on the Confederation Bridge that didn't sound like a good reason to promote this to people correct. Everywhere. And yet, so I wonder what were you personally experiencing in those first years that made you such an advocate for doing this?
That's a good question. I want to make sure that I don't forget it, but I do want to just say something about the blog. So I'm kind of, it's a stretch to call myself a Luddite, but I'm not really, until very recently, I haven't really been all that, active either on Facebook or LinkedIn or anything like that. And social media, I see it has a place in our world, but I didn't necessarily see myself, closely aligned. But I was doing this course at U of T Continuing Ed. I told you I can't stop going to school. And there was a course in, I don't know. I'm doing a certificate in strategic public relations. And this foundational course, like you couldn't get around it, where you either had to do a blog, or worse yet, a vlog, or a podcast, right? These were our three options. And it was like the lesser of 3 evils was doing a blog. And but I had these lofts. It's like, okay, well, if I have to do a blog, I should do it on, and I was really trying to change the world in my blog. And, my partner was saying, why don't you just do it on like something you enjoy, like motorcycling or something? It's like, I'm not doing it. Like, no one cares about shit. So, you should do it on your motorcycle trips. I said, no one cares about my trips. So, and then talking to my sister, it's like, I have to find something to do a blog on. And she says, you should do it on your motorcycle trips. I said, no. So, you guys care because you know me. No one cares about my trips. And then when we had the class about the blogs, they said, just do it on something you can talk about all day. It's like, oh, well, yeah, my trips. I can talk about those all day. People would probably argue I can talk about a lot of things all day. But anyway, so that's how I ended up doing the blog. And it was not, and even when I did it, I had all these entries, and I had done like kind of no one would know that the blog existed. And then we were coming close to the end of the course, and you actually had to be speaking to what kind of traffic you got and da-da-da. So then I put out something on my LinkedIn account, on my Facebook account, and then I'm like on these women BMW groups on Facebook and women riders Facebook, something or other. And so I put in a few places and just said, I'm doing this for a course. Please just go to the site. Like, it's not even like, I'm not saying you'll enjoy it. Just go to the site. And then if you have something to say, constructive, it can be positive or negative, please just weigh in. And that's sort of how I got some interest in the blog. And it was before the end of that first day that I had heard from Pat Jacques, who was doing the training tour in Colorado. That's how I ended up doing the training tour in Colorado. It was because of the blog. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so back to how I became an advocate. I mean, I have to say, I'm not like, an advocate for riding writ large. Sure, I think it's important. That's great. But really, it's about all the women I have met who said, I've always wanted to ride. I've always wanted to ride. Riding, I look at you on the motorcycle. It's like, just do it. Just do it. Like, and there's every excuse under the sun. And believe me, I had them. But it's, what, just try it. Just do it. And it's like, all I can tell you is, the longer you take, like it's gonna just keep not happening. Just take the course and do it. And I find it, for me, so again, I can't speak for anyone else, but I find riding very liberating. Not just in terms of how we can park anywhere. That's also very liberating. But just the whole experience of riding is great. And then, wow, it's such a great way to see the world. And, I've been a passionate traveler most of my life. And so I've had the fortune and privilege of maybe it's around 50 countries that I've been to. Then, since 2015, I've been able to combine my sort of passion for riding and my passion for travel together. And that's when, started these trips, as I was mentioning earlier, to PEI, to here and there, and then became going elsewhere in the world. Mm-hmm. And it's just that you see the world differently. Listen, I travel, just to be clear, with my partner. We go on cruises. We do that because that's the way that she likes to travel. I'm more, I've done Machu Picchu. So I'm still doing more adventure travel with or without a motorcycle. But you just experience a place very differently. The smells, just people, eye contact with people as you're riding past them, people that will actually talk to you, that simply doesn't happen when you're in a car.
Yep.
Right. And so, I think, if I just really encourage more women to do it. To be honest, I'm also an advocate of a lot of things for women to try. Football's another thing. I used to play competitive flag football after my career as a university sprinter, and just trying to get, if you get talking to guys, I don't know if you're one of them, but you'd think it was like nuclear physics, and the next thing is how to throw a football, right? So, these things are all very complicated, very complex. Oh my goodness, you couldn't possibly understand. And so I've also been a real advocate of just showing women how to throw it and how to catch, and realize that it actually isn't rocket science or nuclear physics. It's just understanding, although understanding the physics of the ball does help, but anyway, so there's a number of things that these things that seem to be the domain of guys, and then there's this mystique around it. I like to sort of cut through that and help women realize, listen, there is no mystique, no mystery. It's about time and exposure. And so make the time to expose yourself to this thing, and you too can, enjoy what comes. Right. And certainly with riding a motorcycle, I there's a lot of joy in it for me, and I hope it is for other folks as well.
Yeah, well, I guarantee you that's true. And since you asked if I was one of them, I have my faults, but I think I have a healthy suspicion of any large group of men all wearing the same clothes. So another time we can get into the backstory. But so I have this theory, which lots of our fellow riders will probably disagree with, but I kind of think that you can't really ride till you've got 3 years under your belt, and you're not really safe till you've got 5. This is my arbitrary thing. So with 4 years under your belt, you decided to go to Africa, and it was an organized tour, but it was no joke from what I can tell. So I would love you to tell me, what the structure of that trip was, where you went, and anything else you want to share, because it seems like it was an incredible experience, bittersweet in some ways, complicated, but incredible.
It really was. And so I went through a company, a lot of the trips that we take, if you look online, they're mainly in US dollars. And then you're hedging about, do I pay it all up front, or do I pay in increments, installments, because who knows what the Canadian dollar is doing, all these things. And they're pretty steep. So actually a difference of a few cents on each dollar actually can make a difference. One of the things that's one among many of the things that was awesome about the company I went with, they're a Canadian-based company. So the dollar was the dollar. So that's first off. And it's a company called Renadian, and the owner is Rene, and he's Canadian. I'm guessing. I actually haven't had that conversation. I'm pretty sure that's how he came up with the name. And he rode around the world. I think his job I don't know how he came to not be working. So either he, I don't know if he was downsized out of a job or he left a job, but ended up motorcycling around the world for 3 years, and then decided he loves it so much he wanted to create opportunities for other people to do that, and that's the business he's been in now for a number of years. And the BMW dealer here, every once in a while they would have him come. So I actually had met him in advance and had a sense of what he was about, and then ultimately did signed up for the trip. And I remember talking to my partner, because realizing, I'm going to be away for a month. And not only was she supportive, she said, the thing is this, well, that's the way I talk. This is my paraphrasing hers. The thing is this, we have here's what we know. You're healthy and strong enough to do it now. And we don't know how you're going to be, in a couple of years from now. And that was very true. I have a number. I was, as mentioned earlier, I was an athlete in my younger days, although still active now. And I have all these friends that we were jocks together, and they're not here today. Whether it was cancer, the something, the other, whatever happened, and it was like, you're here now. You're healthy now. Do it. And so that was awesome. And that's really about all the analysis that went into deciding to do it in the year that I did it. It's so that one was a 3-week trip that started in Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe. We met there. We actually were not on bikes yet, so we just had the experience of Victoria Falls and some other parts of Zimbabwe. And then when we got to Botswana, that's where we got our bikes from a company that's based in Cape Town. And so we got our motorcycles in Botswana and rode from Botswana through Namibia and ended in Cape Town, South Africa, at the rental place. And we gave our bikes back and took a taxi to the hotel. The experience was really, truly incredible. It's hard to. I'm of two minds. It's hard to say. I do believe that it was early in my riding in my motorcycle riding experience to do it. Although I had been riding, so I'd been riding motorized vehicles, if you include the 2 years of a Vespa. I was sort of 6 years of riding motorized vehicles, but 4 years of riding a motorcycle. And as I mentioned earlier, there was something everywhere. So in Botswana, it was the potholes that literally, it's not so much they could swallow your bike, but if you could actually do significant damage to your bike if you went through them. They were so deep and so big that you could wreck your rims. But I know even when we say potholes, we're imagining potholes as we see them, which is here's a pothole, then a little bit down the way there's another. But these were like in a hole. So you were doing like a slalom to go around them. So that's what Botswana was all about, the potholes. Namibia was all about the dirt roads. And by the time we got to South Africa, there were these sheer winds that would literally move your bike. And so I would know that there was a gust coming because, we had a set riding order that we had the whole time. And Renee, he was number one. I had position number two. I would see his bike shift in front of me. Then I knew that I had a gust coming towards me. And so that was, so there's that version of the story, right? Is that, oh my goodness, there was something to deal with every country had but I have to tell you, it was the trip of, it was really a life highlight. And I have been extremely fortunate in my life to have many highlights that a lot of other folks just don't get to have. But this one is really at the top for me. And so in addition to, we had the riding part, but there was also very much, experiencing where we were. And so in Maun, M-A-U-N, I think it's pronounced, in Botswana, we actually did an overnight where we flew in a chartered small plane to the Okavango Delta. And we went on safari that day, then we're overnight with animals all around us and hearing animal sounds. We were in tents. And then the next day, again, we went on another safari and then made our way back. And in the 1 or 2 nights prior to that, we went to Chobe National Park, and we did you do an evening river ride. Maybe they call it a cruise, but that's I don't think that's accurate. And that's when the animals come for their last bit of water or whatever at the end of the day. And so there are, hippos and elephants, and literally 15 feet from you, maybe 20. And so, and in the Okavango Delta, I lie not, there are lions like maybe 10 feet, if that. They're coming up to the Jeeps and such. I must say it was much more comfortable watching them come to someone else's Jeep and not just get a picture. But that's, I digress. But anyway, so that was really an incredible trip. I do wish that I had the skill that I learned in Colorado. I wish I had it in Africa. But the truth is, it doesn't matter. I mean, in that kind of terrain, I could have ridden 10 years. And if I hadn't learned, if I could be riding 10 years in the city, and that wouldn't have made me any more comfortable riding in on those dirt roads, right? It's about learning how to, like, the technique around riding off road,
Yeah.
right, and shifting your weight on the like yeah, it's one thing to know that you stand up, but there's so much more going on, right?
Yeah.
How you take corners, how you do all those things. So that's what made Nepal so enjoyable by comparison. And in some ways, the roads were worse than in Africa. Mainly because we were like going up and downhill. It was mountains as we're like dealing with gravel and all these things rolling past us. So yeah, so I was inexperienced as a motorcyclist 4 years, but really there's nothing on our roads in North America that are going to prepare you for the roads in at least not in Namibia anyway. You actually have to off-road and get some training and some comfort there to be comfortable riding in those conditions.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's an interesting insight, because I think there are a lot of us who, we may have been riding for X number of years, but it turns out that it's really just 1 year, of riding X times.
Yeah.
So,
That's a good way to put it.
Not asking for a friend, as they say.
Yeah.
I wonder, so I will definitely provide a link to your blog for people so they can see the pictures and get the raw. Sorry, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, can I say, I actually was able to, through Black Friday deals, I actually have my address has changed.
Okay.
Because I now have the domain. So it's the number 2 wheelandsister.ca.
Okay, perfect.
That will take you to my blog now. WordPress doesn't need to be there or anything like that. And I sort of, as soon as the course was over, I haven't written anything in the blog since, right? But it's, what's missing. There are now a number of trips that aren't there, including Nepal.
Yes.
So I thought, why don't I just, because when I went there the other day, having given you the thing, I looked and there was like a bazillion ads, like you couldn't even, it's like, wow, because that was there my first free year. I guess that wasn't happening. And I haven't been there in a really long time. So anyhow, I thought, you know what? There's this great deal going on now. So I bought the domain name, I bought whatever, and there now aren't ads every time you turn around. Like every 3 lines, it felt like. So it's twowheelandsister.ca.
Well, and the reason I mention it is specifically because of the pictures, because I remember those potholes, and you're not exaggerating. And so I guess the question I had was kind of like, how did you feel when you got home? Were you a different person? Did you get transformed by that experience?
Absolutely. In a few different ways. I've been to Africa twice, right? So the first time I went, I was part of an NGO, non-government organization delegation for the United Nations World Conference Against Racism in 2001. And when I went there, on that trip, rather, we did a safari and did some other things. We were there for the actual conference. And then I came home. Just as a complete aside, I got home this was in 2001, and I got home, and I left the conference a little early because I was still in law school. But I got home at around 10:30 p.m. on September the 10th of 2001. And of course, the very next day was September 11th.
Yeah.
And a whole bunch of people at the conference because the conference had been still going on, lots of people were still sort of stuck overseas for another couple of weeks and all that. So yeah. I just happened to have come home when I did. But I can remember even at that point, I had done a considerable amount of travel at that point, nothing near like what I've done since 2001. But that was the first time ever that I was teary. and we don't know each other, but let me just say that doesn't happen very often with me.
Okay.
And I was teary at the airport, and I was like, what is going on? It's like, it said, I feel like I'm leaving. It's the first time ever that I had a sad feeling about leaving a place. And so, and it was so interesting too, because I had these ideas in my mind that I was going to get back to Africa, like in, maybe another 5 years. I was in law school at the time, and I know that South Africa was using a charter, so I was like, oh, can I get back as a lawyer? All these things about how I could come back. Next thing you know, it's 16 years later, having not gone back, and now I am there on a motorcycle trip.
Wow.
There were a bunch of things that made it transformative for me. As we would go through towns, and we've got helmets on and full face helmets.
Yeah.
And I would always raise my visor so people would see, like, hey, there's a black rider amongst these riders. Just looking at, I remember passing once it was a truck full of, there were kids. We don't want to get into the safety of, like, there were a bunch of children in the back of an open truck. But listen, but I remember just the look, they were just jumping up and down and pointing when they saw me. Those moments are pretty transformative. They were for me. I was, so yes, there were these moments of, oh my Lord, there's potholes. Oh goodness, there's, felt every moment it felt like I was going to ditch the bike in Namibia. All these things. But that's really, I would take that again in a heartbeat to have the experience I had there in this particular trip, again, because we're in bikes. So I said, you interact with people. You can interact with people you're passing in very different ways than you can in a car, and just experiencing all of that. And for me, it was transformative in a number of ways. It was just a really amazing experience. Sorry, I guess I would add, because this is a podcast, as a Black woman. So what might not have been, so clear. I haven't put that out yet. But yeah, as a Black woman, these are the things that really, it just really, really, really resonated with me. Things I learned along the way. And then just these experiences, right? Where I mentioned a moment ago, like, I'm in a boat here and elephants are 15 feet away from me max, and there they are, like, getting some water and wrapping up their day, and oh, there's a hippo over there, and just that experience. And then, as I said, we're riding along, and there were sometimes ostriches would be, I don't know why, they were almost like a pup, like they're kind of they're along the side, like what a dog might do to a male person or something, a male carrier. But, they would be running along, there's cattle, all of those things. And then, as I mentioned earlier, like I don't even know, there aren't words for the experience of, here we are on our road, motorcycles, and we were, it's paved road. This was in Botswana, so paved road. You're dealing with potholes, and you look up, and then there's elephants in the distance crossing the road. Like, you can't, if someone, I don't know who came out of that non-transformed, but that's almost an accomplishment or something. But yeah, and then also there's the experience of, certainly when I got to South Africa, to see what hadn't changed since I was there in 2001. Mm-hmm. And when I was there in 2001, going to Langer Township, which is it's a township outside of Cape Town, and just the sea of I don't know what to call them. I don't think huts is the right word, but there'd be four walls, and a roof. But the walls could be garbage bags, seriously, and the roofs, I don't know what they could be. Um, and that, no, it hadn't changed. I think that that was even bigger than it was in 2001. And so to see the progress that hadn't happened. And, I happened to, just by chance, there was an acquaintance of mine who lives in Durban, and Durban, South Africa. And as I'm traveling along, I'm on Facebook. So I did. My sister made me. So I posted along the way, along the way. Oh, here I am. I'm here. I'm there. Oh, here's some pictures. And then she's like, "Are you in Africa?" It's like, "Yeah, I am." Whatever. She goes, "Are you coming to South Africa?" I said, "Yeah, I am, but I'm coming. It's in Johannesburg, right? That's where I was going to be going to Cape Town in Johannesburg, and I know she lives in Durban, right? So, I mean, it's like people go, "Oh, I'm coming to Canada. Oh, that's great. Yeah, I'm going to be in Vancouver. Can you meet me?" Right? So I didn't, I didn't tell her, "Hey, I'm going to be in Cape Town. Maybe we can get together." But she actually said, "Oh, I can." She had a good friend in Johannesburg. So I met her there, and certainly that was the very most authentic part of my trip entirely. But that's another story. But she said that really they feel like they're in apartheid 2.0. Right. Is so it might be certain things are now not part of an organized government program of segregation and subjugation, but there are still, the progress has been glacial. And so that was something that really, I was really quite taken aback by and witnessed. And, it's not just about hearing. So I already, it's like, yeah, I can see that. So that was also quite an interesting part of my time. But yeah, that's a kind of a trip of a lifetime. One reason would be the price point. Why that was a one-timer. But it's the best money I ever spent, right? Yeah. So but yeah, it was really, really an incredible experience. And my most recent trip to Nepal, that also was for very different reasons. Also an amazing experience, right? And so, yeah, just the type of trip that you have on a bike, right? I'm just repeating myself, but it is different than driving or flying from point A to point B, and then you get there and you go on a couple of tours by bus or whatever you do. It's very, very different doing it by bike.
Yeah, that puts an interesting light on the sort of the next question I was going to ask, and this was raised in my mind by your trip to Colorado, the one that's discussed on the Women Riders Now website. And when I was looking at that stuff, I started to wonder whether you were starting to merge motorcycling with other things that mattered to you. And if that's true, whether that was a conscious choice or whether that kind of integration is just inevitable. And I just wonder if you want to talk about that for a second. Am I reading that right? And if so, how is that for you?
I think that unintentionally that is what happened. So I would love to say, listen, I took a view of my life and I thought, you should try and do. So I can't actually say that I had this grand plan and it all came together for me in Colorado. But I think that's ultimately, that is what happened in terms of, the experience. So when Pat Jakes, it looks like her last name, you would probably be inclined to pronounce it Jacques. It's Jacqueus, right? But they're in the States, so she goes by Jakes. as I said, the day of my blog, she reached out to me, and I'm like, well, I don't know who this person is. And then, so she, likely anticipating that, said, listen, just here's my TED talk, here's my whatever, and if you want to meet, we'll talk. And so she then told me about what the trip was about and what the trip was looking to accomplish in terms of, it was a trip that had some sort of sponsorship by a company, See Me Beauty, and it's about healthy makeup and other skincare products, but for the average everyday woman. And I guess that their models for any of their campaigns are just, regular average women and not like typical models.
Right.
Anyway, and so that all sounded great. Then she said they were actually then doing these. It was essentially like a documentary, a several-part documentary, and I didn't even really fully understand well, but I liked notionally what she was doing and what she's looking to accomplish, and I thought, well, that's great. We were still we were coming off the peak of the pandemic. This was summer 2021,
right?
But and literally it was. While I was there, you could get back in the country if you were vaccinated. Like this was in 2021. All manner of things were happening in terms of even leaving the country. So yeah. I wasn't even sure. I bought my ticket, but I wasn't actually even sure I would be able to go. Right. And I work for OLG, Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation. And, we had ministers here in Ontario, one in particular, who had, gone off to St. Bart's at Christmas. And, right. That didn't play well. And it's not that, listen, anyone's going to be looking, what is Catherine Meade doing? But, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't doing, I certainly wasn't, I didn't want to be going outside of any sort of public safety edict, so right. to speak. Yeah. And so I only really knew I was going to go away on that trip probably about 2.5 to 3 weeks before I actually left. Mm. And so we knew that was always the case. It would just depend, and things shifted. I think I flew out on Canada Day, and things were shifting. There was a significant shift that was taking place July 5th. So that by the time I came back on July, so all of that and feeling that's the direction things were going, I felt like, okay, yes, I can actually go, and so I did. But yeah, what she was looking to now, I had no idea really the depth of. I had no idea what kind of experience I would have there, and the experience of not only learning the skills, which is huge, because that's, then learning what I did off-road actually improved my on-road riding. Mm-hmm. So outside of those learnings, just the experiences it was an all-women trip. And even though the guy who was the photographer and videographer, I guess, he's actually a National Geographic photographer. Oh, wow. So that's you might know some of the things he captured were quite incredible. Mm-hmm. But he believed in all this in the trip, and had met Pat, and he signed on. So there was him. There was another guy who was who drove the support truck, And there was one other guy, I don't actually remember what his role was actually, but that was, and they were like very clear, do not help. If we want your help, we will ask for it. And so watching women as we did and you can see in the videos there are a couple of different, but you can certainly see in mine, we were doing this river crossing, and a lot of the women, myself included, we ended up ditching the bikes because we didn't follow the instruction. I know that's why I spilled, but just the strength of women who are like there, boom, like up. The bike was back up and ready to go, but just the whole that whole experience was pretty incredible. And then like so many trips, you're like, oh, it would be so awesome to just have some sort of record of all the beauty that we saw. And then we did, because it was being
Right.
they're making a documentary of it, so you actually can see some of the spectacular vistas that we saw making our way through the Colorado Rockies, right? So that was an amazing experience. I took so much away from it beyond the skill, which was huge, huge. But so I got so much out of it, in addition to the skills.
Yeah. Yeah. It looked like an amazing experience. Of all the things you've done, that was the one that seemed like I might be able to, cross that bridge and do something like that, because it seemed really amazing and also useful.
Absolutely. You got that. That's exactly right. That's a perfect summary statement. Yeah. It was amazing and very useful.
I want to touch on a couple of quick things to do with, I guess the word's identity. So by the time we're in midlife, I mean, the cement is pretty much dry, in our characters, right? And kind of battle tested. And so, if you start riding at 20, you can, this harkens back to the conversation we had at the beginning. If you start riding at 20, if by the time you're your age or my age, you can legitimately call yourself a motorcyclist or a biker or whatever language you choose. But if you bring this into your life a little bit later on, it seems a bit more fraught. And I wondered, did you think there was room in your definition of yourself for being a motorcyclist as a thing you are, as opposed to a thing you do, or is that something you even wanted or needed? What do you think about that?
That's that's a really great question. As someone, there's an assortment of things that are part of my identity, right? So I'm sort of a poster child for intersectionality I'm an openly lesbian Black woman. There's all these other things. You got a motorcyclist,
right? It was a dumb question, actually.
Yeah, no. So it's it's not part of. It is something I do more than something I am. But I say that. And it's something that I do, but I'm very passionate about it. So it's hard to, there's other things I do. I might cook, although my partner would say you do not cook. So maybe I should say, so I read, but I don't identify as I'm Catherine Meade. I'm a reader. So it is something that I do. Certainly it's one of the things that I do. It is something that a lot of people take note of. Probably there aren't a lot of corporate VPs that go around riding motorcycles. I guess that might be a part of it. So it might stand out a bit, or actually, for all I know, there could be a bazillion corporate VPs that do that. So I need to dial that back. But it's maybe, but I do know there seems to be some sort of novelty around it at work and other places. But it is something that a lot of people know about me. So I guess I'll just say, I'll say that. So it ends up becoming a part of my identity if you know me, right? So if you don't know me, maybe you don't know that unless I'm walking in with a helmet, then you can piece that together. Whereas other aspects of my identity, you meet me, I'm Black. You meet me, I'm a woman. It depends on your level of whatever when you meet me, if you can also figure out that I'm also lesbian. But, it may or may not come up in conversation. But these are things in my identity that are, very much a part of me and often very evident.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, I might have to tell people that I ride a motorcycle, right? So that's why I'm not so clear that I would say that it's a part of me, but it certainly has become very much a part of sort of, what I do, what I'm passionate about, and has had a really big impact, how I spend my time and who I spend it with, right?
Yes. Right.
It's ended up having a real impact on my life. And, I've said, and I said in my blog, sort of, my only regret about learning to ride a bike is that I took so long.
Right.
Right. I didn't do it till I was in my mid 40s. And, if I had that to do all over again, I would have done it. I would have started earlier. But you do what you do when you do it. And you're certainly not going to spend time. I can't go on. I should have done it earlier. Well, I didn't. So deal with that. And, make up for, and on some level, maybe I am making up for lost time, right? In terms of, there's lots of people who have been riding all their lives and have never ridden ridden a bike on a different continent.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So, it's not so really, it turns out to be not so much about, how much time, but what you're doing with the time.
Yep. Yep.
And so I've chosen to integrate it and make it a part of my, my love for travel.
Yep. Brilliant. Good answer. And I guess as sort of a follow up to that, I'm gonna lead the witness a little bit here. I think there is something life affirming about learning and mastering something that's as risky and difficult as this is. At a point in life where it can be easier to coast or easier to stick with what you're familiar with. So I think people who do this, people who do what you and I have in common is starting midlife. After that, you jumped a little bit into the deeper end of the pool than I did. But I think that people who do this are proud of themselves, even though I can never get anyone to admit it. So I'm going to ask you: are you proud of yourself?
That's a great question. Sure. I mean, if you haven't been able to get anyone to admit it, I'm proud that I'm the first person that you got to admit that I'm proud of myself. I'm also though someone I'm really this isn't the only thing that I've done later in life, right? So,
right.
And a skill that I'm mastering later in life. And so, I was as I referenced a couple times, ran track in university. I was a sprinter. Well, I ran track high school and all that, but ultimately that highest level for me was university. Then to the extent that I've done post-university sport, it's been sports where speed and agility are of value, right? And then, of course, as I got older, do you have to be as fast or as agile? That's a whole other story. But what I have done in the last year and a bit is I've done the complete opposite. So where it's been sports where it's called fast twitch fiber, but my sprinting physical makeup has been of value. Well, in the past year, with a friend, I've gotten into distance cycling. And so I did 100, it's something called a Grand Fondo, and I did a 100-kilometer one in the first weekend in August. And then ultimately we were building, and I trained all through last winter and through the summer to do in Vancouver the in September the ride that you go from Vancouver to Whistler.
Right.
So it's 122 kilometers, about 6,400 feet up, and so I am someone who I enjoy. I keep learning, and I always enjoy challenging myself and trying new things and learning new things, and setting a goal and doing it, and achieving that, and as excited about achieving a goal today as I was in my 20s, and maybe I'm more so actually because I have a greater appreciation for things. And so certainly, the fact that I ride, is there pride in that? Am I proud of myself for riding? That I can't say, but certainly to have the stamina and now the skill to have done a trip like I just did in Nepal, I am proud of that. I really am. We were riding in some pretty treacherous. It was a few things were not what the guides thought it was going to be like, because there had been some changes. Whether it's not supposed to be raining in October, and it was some heavy rains and landslides and other things. So it was all a time of discovery for everyone. And so the fact that I made it through that, and I was comfortable for most of that time, and I'm proud of that. I am proud of the trip that I did with Pat in Colorado. Catherine Meade, rode through a river. Now I ditched my I dumped my bike, but I got back on. And then when we went through, we did another water crossing, and I actually listened. I followed the instruction we were given, which is don't look down, look at where you're headed. And then I made it through, and that's what I did. We had water crossings in Nepal. They weren't quite like the deep river we went through, but it's like, you learn. So there was pride absolutely in what I did, particularly when I compare it to my experience in Africa. There is real pride. That I did the trip in Colorado and learned some real skill. My pride though in Africa, even though it was like, oh my God, was the fact that, I did it.
Right.
I went there. I didn't go, I don't know when I went to California, that didn't go so well. Maybe I should just never travel on my, well, no, it's like, no, I'm going to go. And I did it, and I hung in the whole time, even though I was like, I didn't back out. I didn't, and the first day I almost really had a moment, the first day with our bikes. And I remember thinking, there's no way can't go home my first day. And that's really what sort of kept me, upright. And I guess the folks, because I mentioned earlier, I was the second bike. So everyone got to see this thing that was on display. And I guess there were a couple of couples that had cardo systems or something they were talking to. So it was like, she's going to ditch it. She's going to ditch it. And I know I kept it upright. But that they needed to know that wasn't really skill. It was sheer will of, I am not going home my first day. I'm not going to get injured my first day. And I didn't. But I'm proud of that trip because I hung in, I did it. I didn't let the fact that so others might go, you're an idiot, but I didn't let the fact that, I'd been riding motorcycles for 4 years, only 4 years. And I don't really know how to off-road, really. That did not stop me from doing it. And so there is some pride there for sure. Which is different than, these are all, it's not just that, you're just saying you're like proud when you travel, but there's been certain challenges that have come along with that. I actually haven't traveled there are companies, Edelweiss and others, where you can come and you get nice BMWs and ride through the Swiss Alps and all of that. Like I haven't had those trips yet.
Right.
My overseas trips seem to involve, all my travel trips seem to involve adventure travel where you're riding standing up most of the time.
Right.
So that I haven't done one where you get to sit on that lovely seat and watch things go by and with ease. So that's really where the pride comes from. Really mastering or making it through the challenges that came from being in a place that's very, very different than my day to day.
Yeah. Fair enough. And actually, so I was going to next ask you a few short questions about how introducing motorcycling into your life might have changed you in other people's eyes. And it feels like maybe that's not isn't going to be a particularly long conversation, because it sounds to me like your partner has been incredibly supportive and knew who you were before all this came up. And it sounds like from a public and professional perspective, the character that you brought to riding was already in place. And so am I presuming too much here or?
No, you're right. And I'll go you one farther. When I had my Vespa, people would talk to me on my Vespa all the time. Like all the time. Hey, I was thinking of getting a Vespa when I had a guy and I was at a light and I swear to you, there was a guy like in an 18-wheeler and he rolled down his window and it's like, so how's that thing on gas? I'm like, oh my God. So when I got my motorcycle, I remember my partner, name's Catherine, we happen to have the same name, but anyhow, so Cathy says, we ride your bike. I don't know if people are going to be, I don't know if people are going to talk to you so much about, I said, well, I don't know, but that's not going to stop me. People talk to me all the time. It doesn't matter. When I had a Harley, everyone was talking to me about Harleys. When I had my Bonneville, my brother had I used to have a Bonneville. My uncle had a Bonneville, but people stop and talk to me all the time. I'm not kidding. On my R9T, people talk to me, beautiful bike, nice bike. Oh, hey, what is that? What is that bike? People talk to me all the time about what I'm riding. I don't know why. And I'm happy to talk about, I told you, I'm happy to talk about bikes anytime. So it doesn't really matter, but, it's very, very interesting that has not made me, as I'm coming off my bike or whatever is going on, it has not made me less accessible. It has not made me anything. In fact, people, just in general, people talk to me anyhow. That's a whole other story. And being on a bike has not stopped people from feeling like, oh, well, I don't want to say anything to her. She's on a bike. People talk to me all the time. I don't know what it is. So yeah, it hasn't had an impact of making me sort of less and at work, people talk to me about my trip, because I posted my trip to Nepal. I posted pictures from that on LinkedIn, and people, just today, I have been back for 6 weeks, and someone today, hey, I saw your pictures in Nepal. Like, that was such a great trip. People talk to me about biking, being on my bike. Like people I know professionally talk to me about my motorcycling a lot. That's like, now they have something to talk about, right beyond the weather. It's like, hey, have you gone on any trips? But most recently, they all know, people know what I've gone on. So no, it's been people talk to me all the time.
Yeah, that is one of the benefits I find. There's another podcaster who's fond of asking guests whether they're a different person when they're on a bike, and that's, I think, one of the ways in which we're most frequently different when we're on a bike. I certainly am more extroverted as a rider than I am as an individual, but it sounds like you were born ready for this in some ways. I'm probably just as a general rule, I just feel like what you see is what you get. So I am who I am, whether I'm riding a bike, leading a choir. It doesn't matter what I'm doing at work, or I'm on the field in sport. I'm still I'm just the same person. I will say,
out of all the times that someone has spoken to me about my bike, about my bike, the time that was that stands out for me the most is I was downtown in the Young and Church area, right in front of a place called the 519. It's right at 519 Church, and there's a lot of sort of street people and people in distress in that general vicinity.
Right.
So I was getting on my bike, and I was just fiddling around, putting on my gloves and this and that, and I hear some yelling, and one person was who likely had some addiction challenges, but she was yelling at this other man who was coming the other, and I kind of was in the middle. They were on the sidewalk, and I was my bike was off to the side, but on the street. But I was kind of in the middle of them, and so one's yelling, and she's like swearing, "You take your cut." So she's like, it's a lot of F words and whatever that she's yelling, and the guy is coming towards her, which means he was coming towards me as well, because
right.
I was. So he's back to she's like, God, back this way, and he's coming towards me. He goes, "Listen, you looks at me, nice ride, sister." Like didn't miss a beat, and I thought, well, there you go. That's really one of the greatest compliments I had, and this was. Guys in a moment of stress, and he took a moment out to, compliment me on my bike. So there you go. As I said, people talk to me all the time. So
I wonder, actually, just before we start to bring this in for landing, I have a question. The story you just told raises a question that's a bit off-piste, but it would be a mistake, I think, to pass up the opportunity to ask it. It goes like this. So you dedicate a lot of your time and attention to community work, or have done throughout your career. I've always thought of motorcyclists as a relatively high functioning community, at least by contemporary standards. Far from perfect, but at least we wave at each other. Right? Yeah. I wonder if you think that the world can learn anything from the motorcycle community, and whether you think the motorcycle community has anything to learn from other communities of interest in the world that you've run across. Is that a crazy question?
No, it's a good question. Let me see. Well, it is. Here's one thing that can be learned from motorcyclists, but it's actually really, it's actually more an identity piece, and you've just referenced it, and that that we do wave at each other, right? It's like, "Hi, I see you over there," and as long as I've there's not too much going on, I can I'll wave, or whatever we might do, two fingers, peace sign down, up, whatever might happen, but it's acknowledging others as you're just passing them by. And certainly that is something that happens in other groups. Certainly there's the talk about the nod, but generally as I identify as Black. People might identify as another way. I identify as Black, and certainly as other Black folks, we might, there might be a nod, or it's just like, "Oh, I see you over there. You're Black. Yeah, it's nice." And I see you, which is the same as, "Oh, I see you over there riding a motorcycle. I'm here riding one too. I'm just going to nod, or nod, or say hi, or whatever." But it's really about just, taking a millisecond to acknowledge others, right? And we generally don't do that, depending on where you live, right? So I grew up in my formative years were in a small town in Nova Scotia. We had barely 1,000 people, and then when we left there and came to Toronto. But I had sort of over the years trained myself to. We have this thing in Toronto. I mean, you're a little north of us. and I don't know if you've been there all your life so I don't know how it works there, but certainly this thing, like, yeah, you see another person, and then when you just get close enough, then you both avert your eyes, so no one has to acknowledge that there's another human being. And then when you get a safe distance past, then you start looking straight again. And that's just why you learn that. And I had to learn to not say hi to people because I grew up in a small town. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
So fast forward I moved back to Nova Scotia to take a role at Acadia University in the mid '90s, and I had now been very good at not acknowledging other human beings. And I can remember I was at Tim Hortons in the town, and this guy on my way in, he's like, "Hi," and I was like, I wonder if he's confusing me for someone else. By the way, there's like 6 other Black people, so likely not. But it was like, oh, that's interesting. I was like, hi. And then later that day, doing something, there was a mail carrier. I was in a car, and the mail carrier waves at me, and I'm like, who does he think I must have the car. I was in a rental, maybe he thinks it's someone else. And then it's like me realizing, no, it's in a smaller center, recognizing I see another human being in front of me. I'm going to say hi, whether I know this person or not. There's what does it take to say hi? So anyhow, what's one thing that I think we can all learn from writers and other folks that acknowledge others is just like take a second, right?
Yeah.
And take a second and say hi. What writers can learn from others? Well, in theory, writers are part of the rest of the world too. But in terms of any specific community in which I identify, I can't think of anything off the top, but I can think of going the other direction, as I mentioned, things that folks can learn from writers.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I recognize what you're saying about Toronto. I mean, I have a lot of listeners there, and they're all amazing people when you meet them individually, but I do find it a cold city. I was there for 30 years before I came up here, and this is part of the reason why. And no offense intended, obviously, to the people
I hear you.
Who love it. So I'm keenly watching the clock here, so I'm going to try to be efficient with your time. But just a couple of things to sort of wrap this up. You earlier touched on sort of a sense of regret that you had about not having started riding sooner. And I feel that way too. I feel sad about the years that I didn't ride and knew better, honestly.
And sorry, how old were you when you started?
I was in my 50s.
Oh, wow. So,
So, a little bit past the middle. So, but I also feel somehow like riding is what I'm getting back in exchange for that is that it's somehow sweeter for me, that my life is opening up at a time when a lot of people I know, for them, it's sort of the opposite. I think Melissa Pearson described it as being reborn. So I'll stop there and just ask if that resonates for you. Do you have anything to add to how you feel about finding this when you did?
The word I used earlier was liberating, right? And it was just it is. It does open a new, I don't know if the word is dimension, but that's the word I'm going to use. I feel like it's opened up a new dimension through which to experience the world. Yeah. At 46 or in your 50s, we've experienced a lot.
Right.
To open up this new way of new dimension to life, how we might conduct ourselves, how we get around, what we do. I'm really happy. And well, you can go, as I mentioned earlier, you can go on all day, but we can't turn the clock back. And, I think also at this age, I think there is a level of appreciation and and just there's an experiential appreciation that I might not have had that I likely would not have had
Yeah.
in my 20s or even 30s, right? So yeah, I think it might have been just yeah, of course I get to do this and that's the way it is. But not to say that's why I sounded in my 20s, but still, and so yeah, I really I'm okay with it is whether I'm okay or not can't change anything, but
Right.
I am okay with it, coming across, and finally, it's not coming across at all, finally executing on my desire, long held desire to ride,
Yeah.
finally doing it when I did. And as I said, now that I'm here, it's about what do I do with this now? And I really feel that I have really gotten a lot out of my years, 12 years of no, it's 11 years of riding motorized vehicles and 9 of riding a motorcycle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I've been able to squeeze what I can. I'm there's more to come, and I have my eyes on a couple of different things to happen in the next couple of years, and so. And it's funny. I came back from Nepal saying to my partner that I feel like now is the time to be doing these trips, whether it's Nepal, India, wherever it might be, that require stamina. You're not relying solely on the power of the bike. You've got to have some power yourself. These are things I would like to be doing the here and now while I know I have the ability to do so. And, it might be later on in life when I do the BMW trips through the Swiss Alps that I was talking about, when the bike can really do all the work and your, skill. It's a number of other things, but you're not standing for hours or anything like that. And and that's what I really see my priority will be in the next few years is to the extent that I need to do rides that take some fitness. These are the things that I'll be trying to do now.
Yeah.
While I can.
Yeah, which it makes eminent practical sense. But I can't help but noticing that it gives you a certain intensity about the way you look at the future, or at least sort of the middle future. I wonder if we didn't have this in our lives, if we would be feeling the pressure of living to the max quite the same way.
While we can. Yeah, that's hard to say. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel the same way about cycling. I feel like it's just recognizing. So I'm at a point in my life where I'm seeing that life things can happen changes can happen quite quickly.
Yep.
In some cases, you just want to hope, and we hope that the best of all worlds is that over time our abilities diminish but sometimes it doesn't go that way.
Yep.
And there's something that presents itself in later life and it happens rapidly, and maybe you're still here but your abilities are dramatically impacted. And so I see that in a way that I didn't see it in my 20s, 30s, and 40s, which is good. And I'm glad I wasn't aware of those things. But I am just keenly aware that I'm healthy now, and so and that could change. So I feel that way about a lot of things, not just riding, not just motorcycle riding, but it's because I am still physically active, and pre-COVID, I was still playing, touch football, flag football, so I'm still quite active in sports.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's just that feeling of I've got it now, so I'm going to use it now. And if COVID taught us anything, it's like, and you might think you're doing something tomorrow, but, and you might even be healthy tomorrow, but that doesn't mean you're going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
As we're probably all licking our wounds from our travel plans that had to get scuttled in 2020 as we were seeking our money back because we couldn't go.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's also has had an impact on how I view things. Like, let's go now while we can. And the while we can could relate to our physical ability, or, things haven't shut down this week. So let's go.
Right.
Yeah.
Catherine, I have so enjoyed meeting you, and I've so enjoyed this conversation. I'm kind of inspired, to be honest with you. Thank you for making the time. And I hope if you're up this way sometime on a sunny weekend, we can connect on the road. I'd love to meet you in person.
That would be awesome, actually. And, when we talked about having people to ride, it's great that I have friends that ride there in Ottawa. So that's why we do one trip a year. But I'd love to connect with you, and certainly happy to keep in touch. That's for sure. But I really want to thank you for, reaching out to me, and that you would be interested in me and things I have going on, such that you would want to chat with me. And so I really appreciate that, and that it's been a very really enjoyable conversation, and a number of your questions have had me, thinking about things that I haven't before, in terms of how riding is figuring into my life, and how and the impact of that overall. So this has really been great. Thank you.
Oh, more than welcome. My pleasure. I think people are gonna love to hear it. So let's stay in touch, and I hope the winter is brief and merciful, and
amen to that.
Stay safe out there.
All right. Thank you so much. Take good care, Bruce. And again, thank you for your interest. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye now.
Twice during our conversation, Catherine used the word liberating, and I was tempted to take that at face value. Riding motorbikes makes you feel free. But listening to our conversation a second time, I realized that the important part of that idea is probably the unspoken part. Free from what? Or free to what? Well, as sometimes happens, literally the day I began editing this episode, I received an email from a listener in Norway named Harold Solum. Harold somehow found this podcast even before he got his motorcycle license, which he did only recently, also in his 40s. His passion and joy shone through every word, and you'd recognize it immediately, especially the part where he said, "This is probably the most exciting thing I've ever learned as a grown-up." And that, it seems to me, is what motorcycling's late bloomers are really all about. The writer Anais Nin famously wrote, "Life is a process of becoming, a combination of states we have to go through. Where people fail is that they wish to elect a state and remain in it. This is a kind of death." End quote. Well, that's what motorcycles liberate us from, when our lives are in danger of being safe and settled. They may not always be the wisest choice for an aging body, but riding one might be the safest thing you can possibly do for the soul that lives inside it. Well, thanks for listening. You'll find show notes for this episode at thismotorcyclelife.com, and while you're there, check out the Support TML tab. That's also how you can reach me if you have questions, comments, or suggestions, or a story to share. thismotorcyclelife@gmail.com works too. You can still find me lurking on Instagram, where I'm at thismotolife, and where you can connect with many of the people I've interviewed for this podcast. This episode's playlist recommendation was a delightful find for a few reasons. One is the classic song itself, which I'll get to in a moment. The second was that it's performed by Toronto-based Juno Award-winning jazz singer Barbara Lika, who is a star. And maybe best of all, it turns out that Barbara's own life plan includes becoming a rider. I have the little motorcycle license book in my shelf behind me, she told me, with the hopes that someday I'll get my little Vespa. In mint green, as it turns out. The track is Young at Heart. Buy it or stream it wherever you like to get your music. We'll see you on the road, Barbara. And in the meantime, keep staying alive out there.
Fairy tales can come true. It can happen to you if you're young at heart. For it's hard, you will find, to be narrow of mind if you're young at heart. You can go to extremes with impossible schemes. You can laugh when your dreams fall apart at the seams, and life gets more exciting with each passing day. And love is either in your heart or on its way. Don't you know